Good morning. I have a question for you. You can talk about while we line up for Sunday school and head over to Sunday school. Uh, my question is, what is the most unbelievable thing that you've ever seen? And just go around the table, maybe share the most unbelievable thing you've ever seen. And I'll have the kids line up for Sunday school down here.
Also, there's no Sunday school next week. No Sunday school next week. We'll still have Bible study, but just no Sunday school.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? All right. So I'm curious, does anyone have a really interesting thing, an unbelievable thing that you saw with your own eyes? Anybody? I have a really fun one. I did this Bible study way back when, or I asked this question. I didn't do this Bible study. I did ask this question way back when I was in Breckenridge. My mom was there that day, and she had a friend who lived in, I think, near Bemidji, Minnesota, or she had a cabin there. And they were out in their cabin, and they had a video of a huge thing crunching through, you know where I'm going with this, crunching through the wilderness, and they swore up and down it was a Sasquatch. Up and down. And I watched the video, and I got to say, like, I don't know what it was. I'm not sure if it was a Sasquatch, but it wasn't anything that I, like, had seen before. It was very weird, very kind of crazy. So, yeah. Anyone else? Sure. Uh-huh. C-130s? Yeah. Big, big, big ones, yeah. That was scary. We lived in Wisconsin. When I was a kid, we were on a dairy farm in Ohio, Wisconsin, and our house was between the airport, the military airport, and then the place where they did training runs. Like the place where they did training runs is about I think 2 or 3 miles away from our house. So these big planes would come in like at treetop level, doing practice bombing runs all the time over our house. My brothers and sisters were so mean to me too because I was like his age at the time, and I would like this is embarrassing. I had a bad habit when I was like his age. We lived on a farm of, if I ever needed to go to the bathroom, I would just go outside. Like I didn't go inside like a normal person, you know. And a couple of times the plane flew over, and apparently I was running around with my pants around my ankles and fell over. And then my sister and brother put a box over me and then sat on it and kept me in there for like, I don't know, half hour. I don't remember any of this. I was told all this by my mom. So, anyone else? Throw in a weird, go ahead, Terry. You saw an unidentified flying object on the, wow. Was this when you were, Brown County? No kidding. Wow. Hmm. Oh, you saw that pain? Wow. Mhm. I don't know if everyone's hearing Jerry. So when he was out hunting, he saw the Stuart Payne airplane that was flying basically, it was a ghost plane. It was flying by itself. Sad story. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember that? Do you remember hearing about this? Is probably when you were like a teenager, I suppose. Pat Smith. Yeah. Do you remember hearing about that? Because I see the look in your face like, I don't know what you're talking about. Payne Stewart was flying. Where was he flying to? Montana? Carbon monoxide poisoning in the plane, and the plane was on autopilot, so it was just flying. And everyone on board was already dead at that point. So, no kidding. And it flew by nearby here, right? It wasn't too far? Yeah. No kidding. I remember hearing about it. I think I was down at seminary at the time. I can't remember, but yeah. So today we're talking about seeing a crazy sight. Jesus walking on the water, okay? Jesus is setting things up here beyond the disciples' perceptions. It seems a lot like his plans before going to see Lazarus. Why stay behind? How is he going? Hoping to get to? How is he going to get to Bethsaida? Does Jesus know something we don't know? So let's take a look at the text. Immediately, so we're following the feeding of the 5,000. Immediately, he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And they saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. So they headed out like he told them to, and then they got stuck basically out in the sea. Nothing was really working. They weren't getting very far. And Jesus was looking over them. Now, there's a weird problem with the Gospel of Mark here. Because all the other disciples talk about that this story, the feeding of the 5,000, happened on the plains here of Bethsaida, and then the disciples left and went back towards Gennesaret. But Mark is the only one who has it the opposite way, where they're leaving from Bethsaida, and they're going back to, he said, go towards Bethsaida, even though everyone, all the other, John, Luke, and Matthew locate this story happening in Bethsaida. So why would they be heading towards Bethsaida when all the other gospel writers say they're coming from Bethsaida? There's a lot of scholars have argued that maybe there was two Bethsaidas. There's another smaller Bethsaida over here, or so they're all assuming that they're leaving from this Bethsaida, right? Some of them would have said that Bethsaida was a suburb of Capernaum. So when Jesus meant to Bethsaida, he meant basically toward Bethsaida, like they're kind of heading in the direction towards Capernaum, so that still kind of works. Well, it seems weird to say it that way. And then when you look at some of the Gospels, especially like Luke and how he endeavors to write down things properly, and there's some incongruities there sometimes as well, you kind of wonder exactly what's going on here. I read a couple different articles, and almost all of them came to the conclusion that they're not really sure. They don't have a concrete, really good explanation. They have some things to point at, but nothing like super concrete that makes sense. My personal gut thing is that since the majority of the gospel writers are saying that the feeding of the 5,000 had happened here, and the mountain that Jesus was probably on is like around this area right here, that most likely that Mark perhaps just meant towards Capernaum, and so they're heading out and they're going this way across the sea, and they get caught here. Jesus is here. They seem to end up near Capernaum later anyway. So when we get on to the latter part of the chapter. So, because if you see the next thing, Jesus heals the sick in Gennesaret, well, that's here. So it seems to be where they were headed, ultimately, where they end up. So I don't know. It's a tricky little thing. I don't know if it's life or death. I read an interesting article the guy was writing about it, where he was writing about he studied Plutarch apparently in his doctoral thesis, and one of the things he wrote about was Plutarch had several different editions of his work, and they didn't all agree with one another. And he wondered if Plutarch ever had the ancient world, a guy like Bach, for example, he's ways away from the disciples, but just for example, Bach never intended for the cantatas to be collected. I mean, he put them all, he scribbled them all on like sheets of paper and stuff, but they weren't ever made in a permanent way. And the way music was, no one was really obsessed about doing ancient things. We have a different appreciation for historical things now than Bach did in his time. So it wouldn't have been a thing when you went to a church service to sing something old. They would have sang something that, the idea would have been stewardship. We've hired a composer. He works for us. Why would we sing old stuff when we have a guy who is his job is to be writing music for our church for us to sing on Sunday, right? So they didn't have this idea of singing classics of old things. We have a very different, so his thesis, part of it talked about, did Plutarch ever really consider that people would come along 2,000 years later and be deeply studying his works and even his different editions, right? So you can't put upon an ancient source the stringent nature of our study when they probably didn't anticipate that we were going to study it to this level. Does that make sense? I'm saying, so maybe in other words, that's a long way of saying perhaps that these really strict individual details weren't as important to the narrative of the story than maybe we make them out to be. I don't know. It's not a huge deal. It is a little weird, the direction of where things are happening. But if I were, just me personally, if I were to say, I think they're leaving Bethsaida and they're going towards Gennesaret, which makes sense to how they describe going across the sea. When they always talk about going across the sea, they're literally jumping in and they're going by boat because it's faster than by walking. It's going in the boat from here to there is faster than walking from here to there. If that makes any sense. So just trying to do things as quickly as possible. So what do you think Jesus is up to? Does Jesus know weather patterns are coming? Yeah, he's God, right? He's the Son of God. He knows stuff. So does he know the storm's coming? So why does he send his disciples out into it if he knows it's coming? Perhaps. See how they react. That's an answer. Anyone else? To test their faith, strengthen it. Yeah, okay. Because ultimately he knows what he's going to do if they get stuck, right? What else? Anything else? I think, go ahead. Well, yeah, that's why I bring up the Lazarus thing. Lazarus gives us, I think, a little bit of a picture inside Jesus' mind. Because what does Jesus say there? He's like, I'm going to stay put here for 4 days for the purpose. I'm doing this in other words, it would seem from our human understanding, Jesus is letting an evil thing happen. And his answer to that is, I'm doing it on purpose to show God's glory, right? And then there's another place where Jesus doesn't do it, but he does kind of make this point that somebody says, the man born blind. They ask him, who sinned? Oh, I see somebody be like, I brought this up. Okay, yeah. Who sinned, this man or his parents? And Jesus said, no one. But this has happened so that he could come to here this day and allow me to show my glory. And then he heals him, right? Interesting stuff. I would probably lean towards whoever said strengthen their faith. I think in a sense of, if we remember, where did they just come from? What happened recently in history before this? Pastor Smith talked about, I think it was 2 weeks ago. Sending of the 72. They went out, they did ministry, did all sorts of things, mostly good, right? But that's not going to be the nature of their ministry after Jesus ascends into heaven, is it? They're going to meet a lot of difficult times. And so this is part of ministry, this is part of life, it's part of being a Christian, to encounter difficulties in the world, both of a natural phenomenon type of way and also of, princes and principalities of the world, right? Both are pitted against the kingdom of God. Okay. I think Jesus knows, by the way. I think that's why he sends them ahead without him. Because if you remember too, we've already had a Jesus stilling the storm moment already in the Gospel of Mark, and in that one, where was Jesus? He was in the boat. He was in the boat with them. So now it's going to be, maybe this could be seen as a lesson tacked onto that one, right? The first time, Jesus was in the boat. And what did the disciples do? They said the strangest thing. They go to Christ, who is, he says at one point in the Gospel of John, what? I am the resurrection and the life. Right? He's also said several times he's the Son of God. And he's demonstrated his power many times. So why would you go to that person and say, we're perishing, we're dying? And he's like, okay, even if you are, I'm the resurrection and life. Like, what's the worst going to happen? I'm going to raise you up from death? I mean, come on, guys. But the story takes on a different tenor when he's not in the boat with them. Right now it's kind of a 1 and 1A, right? Now he's not with them. And maybe it's to prove, not only strengthen his faith, but to prove this idea that even if I'm not in the boat with you, I'm still watching out for you. You know? Which is going to be the case post-ascension. He's not going to be with them in that personal way. They're going to have to do things on their own, encounter storms on their own, right? Okay, so pass them by. We get to this 48, and he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the 4th watch of the night. By the way, when you get into the Greek there and really look at that, it's kind of funny. The wind's almost personified. Like it's not just the wind's blowing from a different direction. Like it seems as though the wind is trying to deter the disciples. It's pitted against them in some sort of way. Yeah. And about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them. So we have this language, pass them by. Why don't we, Pastor Smith mentioned a couple last time. There's so many water metaphors in the Bible. But let's take a look at this one, Exodus chapter 33. Does anyone have it? So the Lord does this. He passes by Moses so Moses can see his glory, can see the back of the Lord, but not see his face. By the way, what happens to anybody born of woman, right, who sees Jesus, who sees God's face? Say it louder. They die, right? This is why Isaiah is so afraid when he sees the Lord's glory, and why almost all the prophets react in the same way, because they know God is holy, his face is holy. When unholy things gaze upon holy things, they die, right? So the Lord doesn't want to let Moses see his face because he'll die. It's a blessing, it's a grace to him. It's not him holding things back, okay? Now this is one of my favorites. If you want to look at this one too, Job 9:8, and then Job 38:1. So, there it is. Okay. So Job 9:8 goes like this. So it starts with, Then Job answered and said, "Truly I know that it is so, but how can a man be in the right before God? If one wished to contend with him, one could not answer him once in 1,000 times." And then he talks, so Job is describing God, and he says this, "Who alone stretched out the heavens and trampled the waves of the sea, who made the bear and Orion and Pleiades in the chambers of the south." So Job talks about and describes God as what? Being one who tramples the sea, right? And then we go a little further, Job 38, and I believe this is where God actually says it instead of Job. Got to get there. 38. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge?" This is God speaking to Job. "Dress for action like a man. I will question you and you make it known to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb? When I made clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed limits for it, and set bars and doors, and said, Thus far shall you come, and no farther, and here shall your proud waves be stayed." Okay? This is the Lord talking about we've talked about this before, but what is the sea? The seas, oceans, what are they in a Jewish mindset? What's at the bottom of the sea in a Jewish mindset? Sheol, death. Also in the sea is often described as being a place of chaos, being a place of danger, right? Bad things happen to Jewish people out on the water with regularity. So this chaos, this evil, this destruction, it almost describes the waves as being unruly, uncontrollable, right? But God, what does he do? He tramples on them. He walks on them. And what does he do? He also bars them in. He sets their limits. They can go no farther than they are supposed to go, where the beaches and where the edges of the oceans are. I don't know how many of you remember in the Old Testament, what was interchanged for deeds when you had property in the Promised Land? What was your deed for the property your family inherited in the Promised Land? Anybody remember this? It's a really cool little snippet. What did you have for proof? What was your deed for the property that you owned in the Promised Land? The sandals of the people that originally walked its borders. So the idea is the sandals that walked upon the land for the first time, that's the deed. And what does the Lord do? To water, to a place of chaos, to where Sheol is, to where bad things happen, to a place of unruliness and unwillingness to submit. What does he do? He tramples it. He walks all over it. So it's not just this miracle of Jesus doing something that only God can do. Jesus is showing his power and authority over the wind and the waves, over the chaos of the seas, and we could even make a case, this is the first little inkling we get of Jesus showing that he is victor over Sheol. He is victor over death. Just starting to see little inklings of it. Yeah? So he walks on the water. He shows his authority and control over it. I see some kind of gobsmacked faces here. Any questions or thoughts about that? No? Makes sense? Yeah? Okay. So we're heading further then. We're back in Mark chapter 6. So he meant to pass by them, but when they saw it, I should say too that Pastor Smith laid this foundation, so I want to complete it. We should also think about the Red Sea crossing here, right? The way that God definitively controls the waters. And we were just in confirmation class too. The kids were studying the crossing. How many of you remember the other story, the crossing of the Jordan? Remember that story? When Joshua goes into the promised land to conquest and to take that land from the peoples that are there, they cross the Jordan at flood stage. And God stops the river Jordan on one side, and it was reported that it backed up all the way up to the Sea of Galilee. And then it was reported down south that they said as far south as the Dead Sea, the water like basically shut off. Like the river ran dry to the south, right? Because God just stopped the waters right there. And everyone crossed into the promised land through the river Jordan on dry ground, just like the Exodus as well. Yeah? So God shows his mastery over water, which isn't surprising. Like when you make water, you can control it. You can do what you want with it. Which, don't you love how many of you are any of you guys Wikipedia junkies? Anybody ever Wikipedia? So like Wikipedia junkies, what happens is you go in, I'll be honest, I'll go in and I want to go look up the Punic Wars, something like that, because I'm dumb like that. And then there'll be all these links to, the Roman Empire in England, and then I'll go to that and I'll read that for a while, and then it'll be something else, and how did the Romans build a bridge? Oh, I want to see that. And you just spend, I'm crazy. I'll spend like 2 hours just like deep diving on all kinds of silly things that don't matter. The Bible can be like that too, the connections that start cropping up all over the place. So Jesus shows his ability over water. This is not the first time he showed his ability over water, though, is it? Can you remember what will be the first, not in this gospel, but in another gospel, what is the first miracle of Jesus over water? Somebody said it. Water into wine is John says that Jesus turning water into wine is one of the very first miracles he does. So the guy who can just take wine and not move it around, but like change it, add to it. I mean, there's water in wine, so does he add the wine part to the water? Does he just change the water altogether? I mean, I don't know, but he's shown his power and mastery over water already. This is just, miracle number 3, right? So he has the wine, and then he has the first walking on the water, and a ton of steam storms to stop, and then he walks in the water, right? Whole different level of miracle, right? So getting to 49. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. So why do they think it's a ghost? Anybody? Say it louder. Humans don't walk on water. This is not a thing humans do. And if any of you say I can walk on water when it freezes, poo-poo to you. That's not the point. Okay? No one does this. This is crazy. So this just shows how pliable their brains are, right? You get to a point in your life, your brains become very fixed, and you can't take in new concepts. And they're just stuck in old ways. They cannot bring themselves to think that a human can walk on water. This doesn't happen, right? So it's got to be something else. Same thing happens in Luke chapter 24 when Luke describes the resurrection account. Jesus appears to them, and immediately they think he's a ghost, right? And why is that? Well, again, humans don't rise from the dead. When they're dead, they stay dead. And John was there. He saw clearly that Jesus died, right? Dead people stay dead. Well, Jesus is not like every other person. He's very different. So that immediately when they think this can't be a human, again, their brain is still not pliable to this idea. They just jump to the first possible conclusion. He's a ghost. And Jewish people had a really strange idea in those times that they had a lot of ideas about spirits and spiritual, like the guy at the pool of Bethsaida where they're trying to get into the water when an angel flits over the pool of water. So they have this kind of rich kind of, what's the word? I wouldn't call it like culture, but what's it when you have superstitions, maybe? Superstitions, right? And one of the ones I have is that if a ghost comes back, the only reason a ghost comes back is for what? Revenge, torment, right? The ghosts come back for bad stuff. It does not for good things. So that's why they're also afraid, right? They see Jesus, he appears to them, they say it's got to be a ghost, and they're terrified. Why? Well, I don't know. If someone who's your best friend, then you like betrayed him and ran off when he got crucified, you might think he might want a little revenge too. Yeah? So I think that's why they think he's a ghost. But then we get on to, does anyone, any questions or thoughts on that, by the way, before we go on? Okay. So 50, for they all saw him and were terrified, but immediately he spoke to them and said, take heart, it is I, do not be afraid. And I can't help but think about, in the Gospel of John, what does it say? Peace be to you, right? Don't be afraid, peace be to you. I'm not here for revenge, I'm here because I love you, right? Peace be to you. So it's all connections all over the place. Big alarm bells going off all over. So he meant to pass by them, but instead he gets into the boat, or maybe that's what he meant all along, just to pass by them and to get into the boat. Either way, 51. He got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. So it's weird because he just did the loaves thing. I don't know if, I can't remember, I think Pastor Smith maybe talked on this a little bit, but think about the experience of the loaves. This was as much a faith-building exercise for the disciples as it was for the people. If you're ordered to go out and share this bread, what's going to happen? You would think, right? So you take that loaf and you start off doing what? You tear off a small piece, right? And then something happens where they realize, like, okay, that didn't change, so they tear off Remember the story of the woman with the jar of oil and the jar of flour? She keeps going in there day after day, and she keeps pulling out enough for a cake for her, her son, and for Elijah. Is it Elisha? Elisha, yeah. Is it Jah or Shah? It's Jah, Elijah. Okay, Elijah. The other one is Elisha. Oh, that's right. Okay. So she's going in there and pulling flour out every time, and her experience must have been very strange. I imagine in my head how this works is that she said she only had enough flour in her jar for one more cake. So my guess is that there's like just enough in the jar. So she's going in there every time, and there's just enough there, right? She pulls it out. She makes a pile. She makes a cake. She goes back in. That same amount is there every time, right? Now, it's not that, but it's something even more so. These disciples are going out with, my guess is the 5 loaves and 2 fish. You've got 12 apostles. They probably took the 5 loaves, tore them in half. So they're giving each apostle a half a loaf, a half a barley loaf. And it's not very big. This is just speculation. That's what I think. You're going out and you've got a half a loaf. It's probably about the size of the palm of your hand. And you're tearing pieces off. And the only thing that I can imagine, it's one of two ways. Either you're tearing the piece off, and as soon as you do, it's replaced. Or you're tearing a piece off, because this is what we humans do. We got stereoscopic vision. We look in one direction, right? So you look down, you tear a piece off, you look to the person you're giving it to, you look back, it's there again. So then you go and you tear another piece off, you give it to a person, you look back, it's there again. And you keep doing this. And then I imagine, this is just all speculation, but I imagine, now you start getting a little cheeky with it, right? Now you're like, well, I'll tear this sucker in half and see what happens. You give it out, you look back, it's there again. And you tear everything off but a quarter, you give it away, you go, it's there again, right? It keeps happening. Now here's the crazy part. You go through that, you do that, what's 5,000 people plus men and women divided by 12? Probably like 500 people or somewhere in that ballpark. So you do that 500 times, and you still don't get it. What was what Mark is saying here, right? And they collect the leftovers. That part's the weirdest. Because you can kind of understand when they're giving it to people, right? Right? But then how it multiplies them past that, that's the part that I can't understand. I can kind of understand this piece. I mean, it doesn't make sense, but it's still like, you know. But they don't get it. Their hearts did not understand the loaves, right? And their hearts were hardened. So I had a question. Who is doing the hardening? You can say, okay. Anyone else? One of the primary ways this word is used is in the Exodus, talking about Pharaoh. Who does the hardening to Pharaoh's heart? Not at first. I want to say the first 5 times, Pharaoh hardens his own heart. And then after that, God says, I'm done with Pharaoh, and God hardens Pharaoh's heart so that he can get glory over him, right? So with that example in tow, who do you think is hardening the disciples' hearts? So I've got one answer here where people think it's Satan, okay? Which is not bad, because we know where we see some of the inner dialogue going on with Judas, that Satan's entering in, there's things going on there. I mean, it's a reasonable possibility, yeah? I think that is a reasonable thing too. Either one makes sense. We shouldn't be too quick to put this off and say, it could be just the disciples, their heart of heart. The disciples have a kind of Messiah they want. And Jesus is really defying their expectations. Like how many of you are like recent movie buffs, right? One of the few times where defying expectations works. Most of the time when producers and movie directors try to defy expectations, it usually stinks. But, sorry, that's just an inside dumb joke. Never mind. I'm tended to believe with how the book of Mark describes the disciples, how they're kind of melon-headed and they don't get it all the time and they're just sometimes dense. I think it's that the disciples harden their own hearts. And maybe not an intentional we don't want to believe, just an inability to believe. Like just a gobsmacked, what's going on here? This doesn't make any sense. Yeah? Oh. You don't think any of us would have believed? Oh, that's not true. Terry would have believed. I know Terry. He would have believed. That's fair enough. What was I talking about? It was so funny. Oh, shoot. What was it? It was kind of funny. So, I think it was, we were talking, maybe I was talking in confirmation about this. So there's a pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud. Jesus is dwelling in their midst. So they get up every morning. I mean, you roll out of bed and you see a 100-foot tall pillar of fire or a 100-foot tall pillar of cloud. And God's told you from a huge cloud on top of the mountain that he wants to dwell with you, right? So you get up every morning. I have to imagine that would have built faith, right? And then you look at the story of the Israelites, and they're just a bunch of buttheads. They're like, literally, they're sitting at the bottom of the mountain. There's a cloud on top of the mountain. There's fire and brimstone. God's talking to Moses up there, and they're like, this Moses cat, we don't know where he's at. Let's make our own gods. You know, it doesn't make any sense. So then the disciples don't sound that out of line. But at the same point, you're right, I think, Deb, in that when the words of institution are said, we're talking that the Savior, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, is on that altar. You know? I used to tell this a little story in sermons occasionally where, you know, you've got a grandfather and you go and visit him and he calls you up on the phone and he says, listen, I just want you to come see me. I have all kinds of gold coins in my attic. I want to give you one if you come. And then you respond back, I'm going to give each and every one of you a coin if you all come. Grandkids, you know, kids, everybody gets one. And you know, they all respond like, we're kind of busy, you know, we haven't got time, so we're maybe not this weekend, we'll come next weekend. And all of us are standing around going, that's crazy, go get a gold coin. What are you doing, you know? And that's what Christ is holding out to you through his church, right? So you know, flip the metaphor around, like, if you knew that God was going to show up at a 100-foot tall pillar of cloud here at St. Paul's, would you show up for that? I imagine everybody on our rolls, including delinquents, would show up for that, right? But here's the thing. That pillar of cloud is really wonderful in showing us God's glory and majesty, but that's all it does, right? Christ's body and his blood are given for us to eat and to drink for our good. That's better. And if we go to the same people and say, hey, you know, Christ is going to be truly present in our midst in bread and wine, in body and blood this weekend, I'm like, yeah, you know, I got things going on. You know, I'm kind of busy. So Deb, you're not wrong. We make the same mistakes. We make them in different ways. Yeah? Okay, any other thoughts? Jesus walks on water. Okay. Let's do this last little section here. When they crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret. So again, that's why I say it. When they crossed over, they got to Gennesaret. So it just seems like that's where they're headed. I don't know. Okay, I did a bunch of pictures of walking on water just for funsies. Well, that one's fun. I like that one. That was a different story. That's actually pulling Jesus out of water, Peter out of water, which I think happened in Mark 3, right? It's earlier in the gospel? Or maybe I'm thinking of Luke. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Almost all of them, for some reason, all the pictures of Jesus walking on water always have Peter in it. Yeah, can I just get a picture of Jesus on the water? What's wrong with that? I guess. That's not bad. That's fun. Okay. When they crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret and moored to the shore. And when they got out of the boat, the people immediately recognized him and ran about the whole region and began to bring the sick people on their beds to wherever they heard he was. So he gets back to Gennesaret, which is kind of his home base of operations, Capernaum, Gennesaret, this area. So that's why everybody knows who he is. Everyone recognizes him. You know, he's known very well there. Okay? Bring the sick people on their beds to wherever they heard he was, and whenever he came in villages, cities, or countryside, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and implored him that they might touch even the fringe of his garment, and as many as touched it were made well. So we've heard up to this point, and in the Gospels we hear regularly, we get quality over quantity, right? We get individual accounts that are really surprising, like the woman who has her blood issue dried up, plus Jairus' daughter. We have the man born blind, right, who probably didn't have eyes in his eye sockets. We have all these things, like really impressive things. But this is the one place where we get quantity over quality. Or that's a dumb thing to say. We just get quantity. Let's just say we get quantity. It seems like anybody and everybody who can reach out and touch his garments gets made well. How many people are we talking about? I mean, who knows? Hundreds? Thousands? I mean, there's really no way to know for sure. But it was a lot. So I think this miracle story, by the way, whenever we go visit a shut-in, this is the story that's suggested by our Lutheran pastoral companion to read the shut-ins, with the idea that everywhere Jesus goes, and anytime people call upon him, and anytime people touch him, what do they get? Healing. Right? That's why this story is held out as like, this is what you should read to people when you go do shut-in calls. Right? I think this one proves not just the quality of miracle, but that his power is shown here through the quantity of miracles. All kinds of people in the area of Gennesaret and Capernaum were coming out to him and being healed. This is going to lead to a problem later on, though, where this is all they're going to want, is the healing. And they're not going to want the word. We'll get there, though. I don't think we've gotten there yet, but we'll get there eventually. And we'll talk about it then. So, healing comes with no process, no drawn-out liturgies, no grand speeches. Why do you think that is? When the rabbis would heal, there would be a process they would go through, especially if you ever read in Leviticus the process of healing leprosy. It's a very drawn-out process. There are like several steps to it, right? And you had to be kind of checked up every step along the way. So not here. It's kind of the same thing when we talked the last time about Jesus laying hands on people. What's the point being made here? Who does the power come from? From Christ. It's not some liturgy in the temple. It's not some thing going on inside of the temple or some specific words that he's saying that other people say. This is pointing out that the power comes from Jesus. People don't need to have some kind of special liturgy or some kind of special words. They're not who knows? We don't get that information. They might be, but it doesn't come from any of that. It comes from Christ himself. Touching him, holding on to the shawl of his garment, being near him is what gives healing. And that's true the same today. Right? Being near him is what brings healing. closer we can be to him, the better. Any thoughts, comments, concerns? We live in a different time period where I don't know if we should expect, when we get to that chapter, it's a really important linchpin. Jesus doesn't do miracles for a reason, right? And we have to come to understand that miracles aren't the point. Miracles are only to prove what? That his word is effective. And we have his word, right? So we have to understand healing in maybe a different way. If our most important thing is our faith, then the most important healing that we need is for our souls. And being near Christ will give you peace and healing in your soul. And you will reap eternal life. You may not have a perfect body in this life. You'll have one in the next. Yeah? Shall we pray the Lord's Prayer together? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. So we will be carrying on. Pastor Smith, I think, you'll be on next week, right? Carrying on chapter 7. Did want to let you know that we will not have Sunday school next week. Now, we'll be having Bible study, but not Sunday school because several of our teachers will be gone for like Thanksgiving stuff, and many of our kids will be gone as well. So no Sunday school next week. We will have Bible study next Sunday, okay? And Thanksgiving services and all kinds of good stuff are coming up. Blessings.